Hello, this is Troy, and I am creating this introduction to my Gods game that I'm going to be running. Um, I don't know how to make this private on YouTube, so if you know me and are going to be a part of the game, welcome. If not, hope you enjoy it, but no riders. Okay, so with no further ado, let me jump into it. I have character sheets and some other information for creating characters, but I wanted to first introduce the setting for the world and what we're going to be, what it looks like in the heavens. The game is Minor Gods. You're a very little god in a large pantheonic system of gods. So I got a little bit of a fact here. First off, how was the world created? What is the meaning of life? How did we all come to be? And the answer lies here in the godly family tree that I'm showing. And it all starts at the top with Vorn. Vorn is the All-Father, the God of gods, the All-Father of the entire cosmos. His appearance is very stereotypical, the older man with a long white beard, despite his powerful and otherwise eternally youthful body. Vorn's power is completely unrivaled. His judgment is final. His love is as generous as his anger is cruel. His symbol is that of the infinity symbols. So think of the figure eight there with little dots in the center of each, which are meant to represent his omniscient eyes. The All-Father created the building blocks of the cosmos out of the nothingness, or at least so he tells us. And he then created the heavens as an idyllic and serene home where the very landscape shifted to suit his whim and fancy. Vorn is more of a Zeus sort of character than a Judeo-Christian loving god, and his first act upon his creation was not to start filling it with his loved creatures, but really to kick back and just be awesome in the center of it all. He filled the heavens with a race of creatures known as the seraphim, angels, effectively, whose very existence was dedicated to serving him and praising him. Just basically there feeding him peeled grapes, giving him back rubs, and telling him how awesome he is. And that was pretty nice for a time. But the soulless nature and the empty wills of the seraphim meant that Vorn, he grew lonely pretty quickly. He knew that it was artifice that he had created. This wasn't true companionship or praise. So in response to that, he created his first 4 children to share this heavenly home with. This he did by taking a portion of his own essence and shaping the greater gods from it. As a result, each of them was created with the memories, the thoughts, and the divine power that he chose to put into them. So it's an inherited memory. It's a limited inherited memory, really, because it's not that they got everything Vorn had, it's that they got everything Vorn chose for them to have. He's made it clear that he's withheld some of his memories from his children. All right, so who are these gods? First 4 gods are here. Inur, the god of fire. These guys are a little stereotypical, but what do you want, right? Stereotypical is only because they were the number 1, so they made it a stereotype. He's literally the hothead. Inur is very much a what you see is what you get kind of guy. He's not one to be particularly secretive. He'll let you know what he thinks and feels. He often takes the form of a body of fire, think of like Human Torch kind of thing, and his symbol is that of the phoenix. Next is Cullis, and by the way, these are in the order of their creation. Cullis is the god of air. Cullis is the jokester, the Loki of the bunch, so to speak. He's not known for taking things very seriously, and he literally has his head in the clouds sometimes, a little bit of an airhead. Yuck, yuck, I know. Cullis doesn't really get angry, but instead his pranks get really nasty. His symbol is that of the giant bird, and he's known for shape-shifting and invisibility. He likes to eavesdrop and lurk on folks. Fun-loving guy, as long as you haven't pissed him off. Next is Tuari. Tuari is the goddess of earth. In a word, you can summarize her by patience. It's not to say she won't act quickly to defend. It's just that she's slow to change her mind. Beautiful. They're all beautiful. They're gods. What do you want? But her flesh is made of polished marble rather than human-like flesh. And her symbol is that of 3 concentric circles. Finally, Hydron, the goddess of water. A very peaceful presence who often acts as the peacemaker between any heavenly disputes. More about those coming up. That said, she's pretty fickle. She's not always trusted herself beyond her genuine desire for peace. Her symbol is that of a single drop of rain striking the water's surface. All right. So Vorn gave these children his love and a sacred charge for each of them jointly to build him a garden. And in response, they constructed the earth, each contributing their own element to it and vowing to be its caretakers for as long as the earth pleased the All-Father. The 5 of them together enjoyed this paradisial garden and heavenly existence for millennia, before the All-Father eventually decided to improve upon his children's creation even further. And he created a younger set of greater gods using his existing children as models. And these gods in turn enhanced the earthly gardens by supplying their own additions to it and took up their siblings' sacred duty to tend to those elements. So 4 more gods added to the family tree here. These are the still greater gods. They're the 2nd generation, but they're the younger ones. And they are Baelith, the goddess of life, and Mukat, the god of death. These twins were created by the All-Father by taking essence from each of the first 4 children and combining them into these 2 twins. Baelith is the creationist, the artist. She very much lives in the now and is not bound by a particularly rigid sense of morality. Her symbol is that of the sparrow egg, showing the immense power in the smallest of things. Mukat, however, very different appearance. He's the only of the greater gods to not be beautiful. His appearance is that of a rotted corpse, sometimes appearing with a horse's skull for a head. Ironically, despite this intimidating demeanor, he's a very loyal person, and while universally feared by mortals, which we'll talk about later, he is the philosopher amongst the gods. His symbol is the horse's skull. Sake is the god of the sun, the most beautiful of the gods, which is also to say the most vain. His skin is lit from within by an internal radiant light. He's proud, strong, and unyielding, and as I mentioned, he's also vain and arrogant. His symbol is the sun itself. Again, it's all about him. He was created by the All-Father, made from the breath of air and the blood of fire. And his sister, Lenore, is the goddess of the moon, made from the dreams of water and the love of earth. Lenore is the poet and the romantic, as appropriate for the moon. A dark-skinned and mysterious and seductive woman. Her symbol is that of the moonflower. Okay. Finally, there's one last greater god, and that was Krogan, the god of time. Rather than being created, however, Krogan merely sprung into existence from a future time when his creation will eventually occur, his presence extending backward in time to the limits of his power. The god of time has always been something of an enigma. It was rumored that even Vorn did not know all of Krogam's secrets, though such rumors were rarely spoken aloud. Krogam is a dark, brooding man with sharp features. He clearly possesses many secrets of the future yet to come, but he keeps those tightly guarded to himself. His symbol is that of the sundial. Okay, so next question here. How were the humans themselves created? Well, the Allfather was pleased for a time with the improved world, but eventually he wanted more change again. Vorn himself created man from clay and breathed life and will into them from himself, and gave them his gardens to dwell in, that of earth. Though he did not grant the humans with divinity, Vorn withheld his power over the other humans' free will from his children, so the humans could go on to make their own creations. He also wanted the worship of himself and his children from the humans to be genuine and not like that of the seraphim. The Allfather was very pleased with his creation and became very fond of the humans. He told his children that this was his favorite creation and charged them to watch over his humans and to bring them gifts so that they could prosper and continue to create. The greater gods, inspired by their Allfather's talent for creation and out of an envious desire to show him that they too could create wonderful things, created the gods of men as the response to his charge on them. So, another set of gods are created. About a dozen, going through each in order. Sitara is the goddess of passion, created solely by Anur, whose passion alone was enough to create her. Ilurus, the goddess of fate, is the child of Culus and Hytron. Najar is the god of law, child of Culus and Tuari, air and earth. Uman, the god of wisdom, is the child of Inur and Hytron, fire and water. Gudan, the god of fortune, is the child of the creation, I should say, of Tuari, earth. And then from the younger of the greater gods, Maisi is the god of healing. Baelith, the creationist, was far too vain to take others' inclusion into her own artistic creations. So both of the gods she created, she did herself. So Maisi's only parent is Baelith, as is that of Hermongus, the goddess of fertility. Mukat and Sek worked together to create Kai, the god of war. Havosh, the goddess of the underworld, is the creation solely of Mukat, death. Werip, the goddess of marriage, is the creation of Lenore, the moon. And finally, Saset, the goddess of beauty, who is the incestuous child of Sek and Lenore, the sun and the moon. Note, Krogam did not contribute to the gods of men. All right, so what was life like for men at that time? At first, man's life on Earth was fairly idyllic. It existed for millennia in a simple agricultural feudalistic society. Don't get me wrong, there was hardship and conflict in the mortal world without any doubt, but it was different back then. It's a much more naive attitude to these things. The gods walked amongst them, and that gave humans a very clear purpose to their lives. They accepted their lots, both the good and the bad, gladly, and they lovingly worshipped their creators and protectors. This, in turn, the worship, the gods were surprised to find out greatly enhanced their own powers. Just simply that the humans worshipping the gods made them much stronger, much more so than the seraphim ever did. They hadn't noticed any effect from the seraphim. Vorn already knew this. The praise and obedience he received from his children had already been fueling his own power. But now this is an experience that all the gods shared. In repayment to the pious ways of the men, when mortal men inevitably died, the gods took their souls into heaven, where the men were allowed to continue to exist, or resurrected there in heaven, and praised the gods without the hardship and pain that they had had to endure during life. Those that were not pious and worthy were sent to the underworlds, under, of course, Avash, the goddess of the underworld, where they were punished until they could be reincarnated back into earth for another chance to prove their piousness. Krogum. Next question I want to answer is, what happened to Krogum? So this is a pretty idyllic time that I've just described, and only Krogum seemed unhappy during this period. While the others embraced man and their charge to look after them, Krogum held back. He was careful not to defy Vorn, and he did his part, but only minimally and with no enthusiasm. He was the only one who did not provide any of the gods of man. When questioned about this, he said only, "You will see in time," or, "I fulfill my obligations to man and do not choose to do more." This went on for a very long time, but one day, Krogum was simply gone. It was never clear if this was because of his attitude, because of something he had done, or perhaps because of something he was going to do in the future. Certainly his knowledge of the future and his refusal to share information about the future of man worried the gods, and some of them wondered aloud if they should not be as welcoming of man as they were. Still, the gods trusted Vorn, their Allfather, over Krogum, and if that wasn't enough, fear made up the difference when Vorn announced that Krogum had been stripped of his divinity and banished to live forever on earth for his, quote, defiance to his creator. Vorn went on to say that part of Krogum's punishment was to spend the rest of eternity surrounded by the men that he refused to share his father's love with. The gods were told that Krogum was barred from the heavens and that they were not to contact him, only to leave him to his sentence. That's all they were ever told, and the gods were not about to disobey Vorn after that kind of display. Krogum, though stripped of his divine powers, but still more than a mere human, made himself into a ruthless warlord king on earth and spent centuries in bloody rage-fueled campaigns until finally tiring and retreating to a hermetic life. Over the time, humans, who of course are known for having short lives and even shorter memories, they forgot about Krogum, other than the distorted boogeymen-like tales and legends that they used to scare each other on dark nights. Eventually, even the gods themselves forgot about Krogum and went on with their own lives, comfortable in the belief that he had gotten the punishment that he rightly deserved. Okay, so next question. What happened to this golden age of man? Over the many thousands of years that passed during this period, the mortal world stayed fairly constant. With the gods around, the mortals had limited need for science or technological advances to provide for their needs, and the gods actually held some of these advancements back on occasion in order to prevent the excess strife or social upheaval in the mortal world that they would have brought. Despite this stability, over enough time the mortal world did change. The hearts of men grew darker, their ambition and jealousy grew, and their beautiful naivety faded into a much more cruel and greedy society. It's not clear exactly when this happened, but at some point in the golden age, the golden age of man turned into a dark age. Retroactively, most of the gods later blamed the creation of Kai, the god of war, for this, as the turning point, because this led men to fighting more and more violently over their originally subtle religious preferences. Whatever the reason was, the Allfather had no immediate reaction because he was so forgiving of his beloved men. But the problem continued to grow worse. Worse still, the growing chaos and conflict in the mortal world had quietly spread into the heavens. The gods quickly realized that as the mortals fought their religious superiority, the outcome of these wars had an immediate and lasting effect on the actual gods' relative superiority. Their divine sparks grew or shrunk according to how many worshippers they had, so the gods took quite an interest in the results of these wars. As an interesting aside, the term divine spark is something that I'll use a lot, and it refers to the kernel of godhood that exists in each god. It's the portion of Vorn himself that's been passed down, and it represents the source of all of a god's divine powers. The term was coined during a famous conversation when Tuari, the goddess of earth, was being scolded by Vorn for instigating a war on the mortal realm between one of her temples and that of a nearby temple of Sik, the god of the sun. When Tuari defended her actions, stating that the temples of Sik were in fact the true aggressors here, and that she was only encouraging her followers to defend themselves, Vorn responded, "It does not matter to me your reasons. You will heed my words, for I am God." Tuari petulantly responded, "And am I not a god as well?" Vorn flew into a rage against all the gods, not just Tuari, chastising them for their vanity, and shouted, "No, you are not. Compared to me, you are not gods. Each of you possess only but the slightest spark of the lightning storm that is my divinity." All right, getting back to Earth and the growing conflict between men. Despite Vorn's displeasure, the conflict between the gods slowly but steadily grew. As the gods competed for followers and for the dominance of their tribes of followers, they became increasingly preoccupied in their own godly power struggles rather than closely watching over the earth, thus allowing the chaos to continue to grow. In order to keep control over the earthly bailiwicks, their sacred duties given to them by Vorn at the time of their creation, while being preoccupied with these conflicts, the greater gods again created new gods. This time they created the lesser gods so that they could adjudicate some of their duties and of their dominions. The greater gods were no longer cooperating with each other, so these lesser gods all had single parents to whom strict loyalty was demanded. Their presence only allowed the wars to get worse, right? These gods of air, for example, no longer had to be preoccupied with making sure that the skies and storms worked as they did. He had passed that along to his lesser gods and now was free to focus his full attention on the wars and conflicts between his temples and the others. It grew so bad, in fact, over time, even the gods themselves began to fall. Eleusis, goddess of fate, was conspired against and killed by several other gods as part of a massive power play. And Promongus, the goddess of fertility, was killed by her own mother during a failed attempt to kill her first and take Baelus' divine spark for herself. And some people have said to me, "Really? Promongus, the goddess of fertility, is going to stage a coup against her own mother?" Well, let me tell you from first-hand experience that the goddess of fertility can be quite a bitch. Anyway, it was the fear of their own children that finally stopped the creation of lesser gods. But by that time, about 24 of the lesser gods existed. So I'm going to quickly go through each of them. Under life, there's Bagar, the god of animals, and Ferej, the god of plants. Under earth, there's Verge, the goddess of mountains, and Gurk, the god of gravity, Shatul, the god of metal, and Kebur, the goddess of the underground. Under fire, there's Lakux, the god of smoke, Kawik, the goddess of heat, Charada, the goddess of light. Under the sun, there is Dur, the god of day, and Avar, the goddess of seasons. Under air, there is Wentu, the goddess of the storm, Numiv, the god of clouds, and Tikum, the god of lightning. No, not Thor, Tikum. Underwater, there's Ovak, the goddess of the sea, Nisam, the god of the river, and Sil, the god of fish. Under death, Amarat, the goddess of famine, Prague, the god of disease, and Ruk, the god of decay. And finally, under the moon, there's Davik, the goddess of night, Lavanus, the god of sleep, and Raipal, the goddess of tides. All right. So, how did the dark age of man eventually end? Finally, the All-Father was forced to act. He could no longer forgive what was going on or pretend that it was going to resolve himself. Disgusted at what had become of his garden, his men, and his children, the All-Father banished all of his line from the mortal realm. The gods were confined to the heavens, and they were ordered to stay out of the affairs of men and to interact with the mortal realm only from the heavens, and only enough to perform their sacred duties there. Sacred duties, of course, being their charge to be caretakers of the earth, effectively to make the world keep spinning. They were not to interact with humans or their power struggles directly, and they were threatened with their own destruction should they disobey. The All-Father took all the humans out of the heavens. The gods still have no idea where they went. And the nature of the underworld was changed. It's Havash's realm. Now all of the recently deceased souls of men were directed to the underworld, but upon arrival they were no longer resurrected. Rather than a place of rehabilitation, the underworld was now nothing more than a massive crypt, where the souls of men were stored until, quote, there is a better place for them to enjoy the proper afterlife rewards. The All-Father went on to tell the gods how disappointed he was in all of them, and worse, how angry he was that they had lost so much respect for him that they would willingly disobey him, as evidenced by the fact that they could not put their petty squabbling aside. In short, Vorn was furious. Somehow, this only increased the rift between the gods and their father, rather than shame them back to their younger and simpler attitudes. Only the All-Father himself would still appear before men, but after only a handful of centuries, a very short time for a god, even he stopped. He didn't seem to get the same pleasure from his world of men as he once did. The human conflicts only seemed to intensify despite no longer having the same fuel for their religious wars. The humans, like the gods, seemed incapable of complying with Vorn's commands for them to love each other. In the heavens, Vorn had quelled the wars and the gods made peace with each other, but the old trust never really returned. Rather than brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers, they were opponents now. Disappointed in both the heavens and in the mortal world, the All-Father began having periods of absence. For increasingly longer periods of time, the gods could not find their father and were left to their own reconnaissance. The gods had all kinds of theories about where Vorn might be going and what he was up to there. But when Vorn returned, he refused to discuss these theories with any of the ones that they dared raise to him. Finally, at one point, the All-Father just disappeared entirely. As Krogum had apparently foreseen, the gods had come to resent the humans and their father's apparent preference for them. Today it's thought that Krogum's crime must have been to be the first to be jealous of man and perhaps to try to do something about it before this time could finally come to be. So, the question is, What were the heavens like after the Vorn left? It had been millennia since the All-Father had been seen, and the gods were left in this awkward holding pattern, too fearful to deny any of his edicts in case he was still watching them and looking for an excuse to punish them, perhaps more harshly even than Krogum had experienced. The gods stayed out of the mortal affairs and looked after their own dominions in the world, but only from the heavens as ordered. This was done two ways. One, by creating connected representations of the earthly world aspects in the heavens. These copies are referred to as idols. Now, when the gods used their powers over these idols, for example, by feeding and nurturing a small group of deer idols in the heavens, the gods' will and power was subconsciously felt on earth, where deer herds would thrive and multiply despite whatever adversities they might have faced. Likewise, if something significant occurred to their earthly presences, such as a disease, the idols in the heavens would reflect this change by showing the same illness. The second way, even without the involvement of the idols, the god's will would subconsciously guide the elements of earth and enforce the physical rules and definitions previously established by that god. In other words, the god knew the way things were supposed to work, and subconsciously his power still extended into earth and forced things to continue to work, quote, properly. Conversely, anything that threatened those boundaries too much would draw the god's attention to it and allow the god a window into the mortal realm via their heavenly sight power, so that they could assess the problem and remotely exert now conscious control over it. In other words, something happened that was just too strange to a natural order. The clouds would part, so to speak, for that god, and they would actually be able to peer into the mortal realm, maybe not to get the big picture, but in order to see what was going on there and exert their godly control over it. So in this way, the gods were aware of the goings-on of their dominions at earth and still able to care for them without being directly involved, and as a side effect of this, without necessarily seeing the whole picture of what was going on in the mortal realm as they once had. As the years went by in the absence of the All-Father, the greater gods had become the highest authority. Though they have their disagreements, they have come to a fairly cordial if distant relationship with each other again. Their authority was directed to maintaining the status quo, and life in the heavens therefore became rather dull. The gods still had their seraphim to serve them to the best of their abilities, and without much else to occupy their time, the gods wind up spending their time with more trivial pursuits: parties, fashions, artistic creations, meditation, philosophical debates, petty disputes, various types of competitions, and the complex but trivial political status maneuverings took up all of the gods' attentions. This counted doubly for the gods of men. These gods, who, unlike the others, had nothing really to do in the mortal realm anymore. Part of Vorn's commandment to stay out of the affairs of mortals meant that the gods of men had been relieved of their sacred duties. Their very meaning of their existence had been diminished to these trivial means of filling their time. As a result, their divine sparks all but diminished as time went on. Some of them took to hermetic existences in the heavens, rarely interacting with others, while others became greatly obsessed with some trivial thing, such as writing poetry. Trivial for God, of course. No offense to poets out there. The gods of men are now the least respected of all the gods in the heavens today, some of them branded with outright pity or disgust from the other gods. So, ironic shift that the gods of men, who are a second generation of God, are now less revered and in many ways less powerful than the third generation, the lesser gods. All right. Next question. Where did the minor gods come from? That's going to be my last question. Minor gods, remember, are going to be your characters. It was eventually the lesser gods themselves that were the next to threaten the peace in the heavens. It started with the lesser gods of water. Here. Ovak, Nasam, and Sil. These three gods became concerned that the world of men had been growing out of control and threatening the stability of Vorn's gardens that they were all created to protect. Without knowing exactly why or how, it was clear that men had grown to the point where the pollution and overfishing of the waters were reaching dangerous proportions. A little paradox here, however. Without the ability to directly intervene, the gods couldn't stop the damage that man was doing, and yet it's their sacred duty to maintain the balance of these elements of water on Earth. So what are they supposed to do? The other lesser gods admitted that they were seeing similar impacts on their own dominions, but didn't seem to know what could be done about it. It was these three gods that concluded that it was critical that they find Vorn. They further concluded that they needed help to search properly, since they lacked the manpower and were having difficulty recruiting the other gods to their cause. Thus, the first minor gods were created from their own essences. Again, like the lesser gods themselves, they created their own siblings without an involvement of others. So the first minor gods were created as the gods of lakes, the depths, streams, saltwater fish and freshwater fish, and more. At first, the other gods didn't really care. The minor gods got their divine spark from the lesser gods, so the balance of power is not being significantly shifted. The goddess of water, Hytrin, wasn't being diminished. Rather, these three lesser gods, Ovak, Mesem, and Sil, their power was diminished as they gave it on to the minor gods. So as a result, the balance of power wasn't really being significantly shifted. Also, since the greater gods desired the return of the All-Father as much as they probably also feared it, the creation of the first minor gods got very little attention. However, the practice caught on very quickly. Sick of being at the bottom of the political play power totem pole, not counting, of course, the gods of men, whose very status of gods was only technically acknowledged anymore, the lesser gods began to rapidly create minor gods of their own. This was also because they had been becoming increasingly worried about the balance of power in the heavens. The greater gods have been growing slowly but increasingly stronger as the political maneuverings earned them increasing amounts of fear, respect, and therefore a kind of worship from the other gods. In other words, they've been slowly siphoning some of that divine spark off of the other gods just because they've managed to create a growing impression of themselves as so much superior, so much worthy of their respect. And to be fair, the greater gods are a lot stronger than the lesser gods. Like Vorn, they only passed a small portion of their divine spark on to the lessers when creating them, and the lessers learned that lesson and did that with the minors. Likewise, memories, I should point out. Creation of the minor gods withheld some of that inherited memory. So everything you know is what your parents chose to share with you. All right, where was I? The greater, if the lesser gods were ever asked why they were creating more and more minor gods, they would swear that their motivations were to help in the search for Vorn. But the practices of these new minor gods didn't support that claim. It became clear that if the lesser gods could not increase their own divine spark directly, they could at least increase their numbers. The delicate peace in the heavens rapidly started to deteriorate once again. Seeing the error in their apathy and fearful that even the other greater gods might start to take up the practice, the oldest of the greater gods, these four, The oldest of the greater gods declared that no more new gods were to be created, and that any new children would be immediately destroyed. The tensions stopped rising as a result. They never really reduced. The political games became much more pointed than they had been, and the divides between generations and between the family lines increased, meaning the lesser gods didn't trust the greater gods. Even the minor gods bonded much more closely with each other than the lesser gods, and yet there is an understanding where all air and your earth, and we don't associate with you or entirely fully trust you. There are some that whisper now that a war in the heavens is coming soon, and that the wise God is preparing themselves for this inevitability. Such words and actions are of course severely punished by their elders, but nevertheless, instances of disobedience are becoming more and more common, more brazen, and curiously, they're being less frequently caught and punished. This lends credence to the rumors that the elders are preoccupied with their own secret Cold War, which of course does nothing to soothe the tensions. Such is the current state in the heavens. That is the game that you're coming into. In the meantime, the mortal realm continues to develop without any divine guidance and has now become a parallel version of our own world. Similar in some ways to our world, but of course distinctly different in many others. This happened relatively quickly, by the way. It's compared to the many, many millennia that the mortal realms kept that same sort of agricultural, feudalistic, primitive society. It's only been a handful of millennia since Voron's disappearance, and they've launched up to a modern age. Many gods lack the power to even directly monitor the ongoing developments of the mortals and have no knowledge of the state of the world today, other than the rumors and hints that they can extract from the others over time. The minor gods, like yourself, have never even set foot upon the mortal realm, and for the most part are largely ignorant about the mortal realm and the modern humans. You have inherited memories of the old agricultural societies. You understand that the world has taken on a much more advanced understanding of science, technology, politics, and business since then. You don't really understand the details of what that means. Okay. So thanks for listening. That's the setup for the game. I'm going to have some pre-created characters, which you are going to feel free to choose from, or you can make your own. This is that character sheet, and it looks kind of intimidating with all the comments I put in here. It's really pretty straightforward, though. A little bit of information about your character. What's your name? What's your god's name? What's your dominion going to be? And I have another document that's a list of some of the things you might choose from. For example, underneath plant, there's trees, flowers, fruits, and herbs. You can do other stuff. Not doing more specific than that. I know there'll be some that will be disappointed that you can't be the god of parsley. But as you can see, the game took a much more serious than comedic feel. So God of Herbs is what's available. But there's other things that you can do. If there's something that's not there, I'm happy to talk to you about doing something else. Description. Just get into the mood of your character. What do they look like? What's their personality like? What kind of goals do they have? How are they spending their time? Any sort of objects, symbols that they're normally associated with. Statistics. Create statistics. You have only 4 points that you can dole out to each of these. They're all rated a 1 to 5, and you have 1 point in everything. Mortals are somewhere, in a decimal range, 0.1 to 0.9, so to speak. So to start off with, all of you are better than mortals, but only slightly. Strength, toughness, dexterity, speed, presence, intelligence, wisdom, and power. You can only take the 1 in power. That's your divine spark. I'll let you read about what they are, but the interesting point should point out now is the way die rolls are going to work. Stat checks are going to be made by rolling 5d10 against, or it's not 5d10, a d10 against a difficulty set by me. The default would be 6. And counting your successes. I think I said 5d10, the number of d10 that you have points. So if you have a stat of 3, you get 3d10. Sorry. So a 10 means that you can add another d10 and roll it again. Yep, I've confused myself. I'll come in again. It is 5d10. Sorry. You roll 5 10-sided dice. Each star beyond 1 reduces the difficulty by 2, and lowers the explode threshold by 1. Meaning if you have the difficulty 6, you roll 5d10, count how many successes. A success will be something as 6 or higher. But if you have a stat of 2, you're still rolling 5d10, but each success is a 4 or higher, and every 9 or 10 means you can roll a 6 additional dice. Okay. That same process, which I just confused there, sorry, same process is used for power activations. Here's a bunch of divine powers, superpowers, but now you have only 2 points to spend. The dominion powers basically mean control over some sphere. So I was describing them before. Fire, animal, or say mammals, small mammals. These are examples of a greater dominion, a lesser dominion, and a minor dominion. So you get 3 points in the minor dominion of your choice. If you are going to be the god, let's pick one at random, if you're going to be the god of noon, high noon, then you have 3 points control over noon. I'm not even really exactly sure what that means, but there it is. And 1 point control over lesser dominion, that of your parent, day. No points in control of the greater dominion, sun. You can take more minor dominions, more lesser dominions, but no greater dominions. So in other words, you can put 1 point into control of seasons, or you can put 1 point into control of spring. And just to keep balance, if you put 1 into a minor dominion, I'll give you 2 points to it instead of 1, so it's less powerful than that of a lesser dominion. Influence dominion. This is a special power. Keep in mind, as I explained, the god's unconscious power is what runs their principal dominion of the world. Power allows a god to, this influence dominion power allows a god to subvert, block, or request something from another god's unconscious will. Sort of a professional favor or privilege, if you will. So it effectively becomes a dominion power over every other dominion. However, the more radical the change from the natural order, the harder the effect is to produce and the more likely of drawing the conscious attention of the god whose dominion you're influencing. Finally, perceive dominion is awareness and a flow of this divine power. It's a knowledge of that particular dominion. Rather than creating, destroying, manipulating, you're simply getting insight into that nature, but it means a much lower difficulty and a much lower chance of the other gods, really having no chance of the other gods being alerted by using this power. All the other powers which I'll let you read are various cool things that gods can do, turning desolid, teleporting, or your immortality. Some of these you have a point in to begin with, like immortality, heavenly sight, which I described, others of which you don't. So all of these powers, dominion and divine powers, you have only 2 points to dole out. What it means is that most of these things you don't get because you're a tiny little minor god. So we'll make characters when we play. They'll be pre-built characters, but if you want, feel free to play around with these in advance. Okay, that's all I have. I'm looking forward to gaming with you. Hope you're excited about the game as well. And until then, think big.